Okay, I will call to order the Monday, October 10th, 2022 work session of the Oregon City Planning Commission. We probably can dispense with a roll call at a work session. So we'll go right into the first item on the agenda, which is a discussion of the planning process in Oregon City and our levels of review. And I believe that's Ms. Robertson-Gardner, right?
There we go. Apologies. So there was a request to discuss the levels of review for land use applications, and I have a presentation that some of you may have seen before, but we'll kind of go through what each level of review is, and then a memo is written by myself and our Deputy City Attorney, Carrie Richter, and then we can go in after the presentation, any specific questions you have. But let's kind of get everyone up to speed on the 4 levels of review and what's involved in each one, and kind of the continuum from not discretionary to more discretionary. So I'm going to start my presentation. Okay. So in front of you, you'll see kind of the continuum of the 4 types of land use applications: type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. So I'll go through each one in a little detail. And then if possible, we can hold our questions to the end unless you think there's a question that really is needed to figure out in order to go to the next criterion. Okay. Turn it on.
Sure.
Oh. Yeah, but it's my clicker isn't working.
Okay. I can move the slides for you.
Okay. All right. Okay. So a type 1 application, that is our lowest level of a review. It's the least discretionary. Type 1 applications are really reviewed as part of the building permit. Next slide. So examples would be home addition, a deck addition, new middle family housing, as you just approved in July. So these review criteria, I call it the 4th grade math test. It's usually setback, height. Do you have a front door that faces the street? Do you have a 60 square foot front porch? Do you have 10% or 15% window? These are things you can measure. You either meet it or you don't. And so there really is no discretion, therefore there is no notice, and these are not appealable. And so things that are part of our type 1 process, as I said, are, for example, for a review of a deck, we take it as part of the building permit, they'd have a planning packet. Once again, we review these kind of technical measurable criteria. Next slide. Our type 1 process is generally reviews about 10 minutes to 1 week, depending on how complicated it is. And that really is sent to us through the building department through a planning review. And an application fills out how they meet the criteria. Next slide. The next section is the type 2. This is still a pretty clear objective and has a limited amount of discretionary review. If you'd like to go to the next slide, Aquila. So the type 2 process involves things like site plan and design reviews, partitions, subdivisions, requires a pre-application conference with planning and engineering staff. Once you turn in your application, we have a completeness review to see if you've turned in the required application materials. And then once you're complete, the 120-day state land use clock starts. So the city has to provide a final city decision within 120 days. And that is including any appealable time for appeal. So generally, the city tries to get decisions out between day 45 and 60 of the 120-day process to leave time for appeal. There's a 2-week public comment period. And after the public comment period closes, staff reviews any public comments, reviews them against the approval criteria, and provides staff findings on if any of the comments are applicable to the approval criteria. Anybody who made comment as part of the process will get a notice of the decision and can be involved in any appeal to the city commission. And those appeals are based on the record. So the next slide. So as an example, we have a new commercial building, a multifamily structure, a new, I don't know, let's see what the bottom of that is. That looks probably like some type of other multifamily structure. Subdivision, sorry. The next slide, public notification. You've all seen these. This information is posted on the property and sent to property owners within 300 feet, and provided notice on our city website. Next slide. An example finding for a type 2 decision would involve, still pretty clear and objective. So the one you see here looks at the materiality of the proposal and do they have any prohibited materials or prescribed materials in the situation. Other type 2 applications may have a little limited amount of discretion. This often is involved as it relates to engineering reviews, such as a transportation study, street improvements. Subdivisions and site plan design reviews are built in the real world and are often infill. And so there are situations where modifications are required because we all don't live in theoretical world. We have to build on the ground that it is. So in 1762, our site plan and design review chapter, as well as chapter 16, there are modification requests. So in their situation, it might be that a subdivision is in a place where the abutting, the abutting sidewalks can't be built because of geohazard reasons, or maybe an infill, there is a different kind of sidewalk on both sides of the application, and it makes sense to continue what is being built. So those are examples of when you have your pretty clear objective criteria, but there's a situation where modification may be requested. To take the criteria and look at the specific situation, and if that criteria can't be built because of topographical reasons, what makes sense to be built while still meeting the requirements of the code. Next slide. So an example of a land division criteria, does the application meet the lot size, lot depth and width? Has the applicant identified their stormwater impacts? Have they provided a stormwater study to look at if they've sized their stormwater basin appropriately? These are a lot of times in subdivisions, these are technical reviews. Have you adequately sized your utilities to meet the requirements? And for your transportation study, have you adequately assessed the transportation impact both on-site, things like site distance, driveway location, and off-site, or any off-site impacts identified that are proportional to your development? Next slide. So the next criteria is a type 3. This is where we get into the public hearings process. This is more discretionary. You've left the place where staff makes the decision that's appealable to the city commission, and you have a hearings body, the planning commission, making the decision. Next slide. Examples of type 3 applications, conditional uses for like a school or a church, a master plan. What we're seeing tonight, a variance application. Those are discretionary that are balancing approval criteria and looking at off-site impacts to the community, impacts to the site itself. You're doing a qualitative analysis of the criteria. Next slide. So here's some example. If we started type 1 was the 4th grade math problem, if type 2, maybe it's the 7th grade math problem, this is a higher level of discretionary review. You are balancing criteria, you're looking at impact, you're looking at our comprehensive plan policies. So for example, for a new school, you'll start seeing how this criteria is laid out differently than the two that I spoke of before. So for example, the criteria for the school is the characteristic of the site is suitable for the proposed conditional use, shape, location, topography, existing improvements, and natural features. The proposed use will not alter the character, so character is a very subjective term, of the surrounding area in a manner which substantially limits, impairs, or precludes the use of surrounding property, so impact criteria. And the proposal satisfies the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. So you're starting to kind of look at different comprehensive plan policies and see how they interact with the request, either conditional use or variance. Next slide. So type 3 processes really follow the same state land use process as your type 2. You have the pre-application conference, you have the completeness review, you have the public notice, but you have a public hearing. So there's a 20-day notice of the public hearing at the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission holds as many hearings as they need within our 120-day land use process, unless the applicant provides an extension because it is in their favor to do so. And the decision is final unless appealed to the City Commission. Next slide. So same public notification. It provides information about the Planning Commission hearing, and it's mailed out to property owners within 300 feet, our transmittal list to our agencies and neighbor associations, and the sign is posted on the property. Next slide. So now we're at type 4. This is the highest level of discretionary review. This is where really the Planning Commission is a body really making a policy recommendation to the City Commission. And the City Commission is at a place to balance maybe lots of competing city goals, making really a policy direction about, is this proposal meeting the City Commission's policies and aims? And so, next slide. An example of a type 4 application may be a zone change by an applicant, a comprehensive plan map amendment, or maybe an annexation, or a text amendment to the code for a specific property. Legislative applications are generally identified as citywide approaches or affecting more than one property owner, but sometimes a property owner may come in with a text amendment to our zoning code that really only affects one or two properties, and that would be run through a type 4 process. Next slide. So examples of a zone change, is this compliance with the comprehensive plan? Can our utilities be made available to support the range of uses and development allowed by the zone? Is this consistent with the existing or planned functions, capacity, level of the service of the transportation system and proposed zoning district? So that's a little bit more specific, but if you maybe were moving to a comprehensive plan map, so you're changing, let's say someone wanted to propose a change from a campus industrial to residential. So I want to do a comprehensive plan map amendment from campus industrial on my property to high density residential. I want to build apartments. In that situation, the city is looking at their adopted plans. What does our housing needs analysis tell us? What are our city goals and policies about areas we need for jobs and housing? So you're looking at both goals. Where's the site located? How does it affect the neighbors? Is this a reasonable request? Is this something that we missed 20 years ago when we zoned? So you're looking at very discretionary criteria as it relates to the goals and policies of the city. Next slide. And once again, same beginning process, pre-application conference, completeness review, 120-day process. But in this situation, we are holding both a planning commission hearing and a city commission hearing. And type 4 processes, unlike legislative, are still bound by the 120-day process. So we still have to fit those hearings in and have a final decision within 120 days, unless the applicant extends that. Legislative processes that, of course, affect more than one or two properties are not bound by the 120-day process. Next slide. We do have, there are some, in the memo submitted in the packet, we go through each of those criteria as well as the clear and objective standards for housing that the legislature has set forth over the years and really has been upheld by numerous Land Use Board of Appeals decisions that have provided additional direction. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to our Assistant City Attorney, Carrie Richter, to provide a little bit of clarity on how the city sees clear and objective standards, requirements, and how we review our type 2 processes related to housing of multifamily and subdivisions and partitions.
Thanks, Christina. So, as I think the Planning Commission is aware, the city's got an obligation to apply only clear and objective standards to housing applications. And that's why we went through and did the code audit last spring in June, making some tweaks to the code to ensure that we were in compliance with the clear and objective requirements. The state law says that not only do the city's criteria and conditions of approval have to be clear and objective, the procedures that the city uses cannot result in undue delay. And to date, we have interpreted that to mean that a type 2 review does not result in undue delay. There are no cases that have considered that. In fact, when you look at the state law, that there is a special state law that sets out procedures for subdivisions and site plan review, which are what we run housing through, right? Because we've got design guidelines for housing and we've got land divisions for housing. And that special procedure is what our type 2 reviews go through. So the assumption that we're making is that if the legislature thought that requiring a type 2 review for housing resulted in undue delay in violation of the needed housing rules, they would also change those procedures that the city is relying on when it's processing them that way. And the other reason why I think it's important that we go with type 2 review for land divisions and design review for housing is for the reason that Christina mentioned, which is the unique circumstances that affect property, that we need to have experts have the discretion to evaluate. For example, the stability of steep slopes. Right? We have to be able to evaluate the stability of steep slopes with something more than a 4th grade math test. It's this steep, so no development. It's this steep, it's developable. I mean, there's more that goes into the science of that. And we have to be able to have geologic hazard analysis that applicants submit. And we have to have our own, the city's own geologic hazards expert evaluate the character of that analysis and make recommendations about not just yes development, no development, but what can we do to make the development safe? I mean, there's all kinds of technologies that developers can use to ensure development on steep slopes. And so we want to have the ability to condition approvals for housing on steep slopes that takes that into account. And the same thing is true with traffic, right? If we're going to break an intersection, we have to have the discretion to fix it and decide how best to fix it. And that's why we want to have type 2 reviews for these clear and objective needed housing proposals. And also so that the public that is most directly affected has an opportunity to comment during the comment period, and then if they're unhappy with the decision, the opportunity to appeal to the city commission. So that's the way clear and objective sort of fits into this long stance. So this structure of type 1 to type 4 has been around forever, and now that's how clear and objective has sort of slotted into that long-standing breakdown of decisions. I'm happy to answer any other questions or on any comments, if any commissioners have any.
Okay, commissioners? Commissioner Stoll.
On the type 4 slide, it said that it was appealable to the city commission. Is that right? You can appeal there.
Yes, sir. If the planning commission denied the decision, it's appealable.
Okay.
So the way type 4 quasi-judicial hearings work is if the planning commission approves the application and it is not appealed, then that's the final. If it's denied, then it has to be appealed. Is that right? Mm-hmm. If it's denied, then it has to be appealed. If it's denied, it's an automatic recommendation?
If it's planning commission recommends denial, it doesn't go further.
Okay, so I had it backwards.
Yeah, and if planning commission recommends approval, it'll go to the city commission on recommended approval. But if the planning commission denies the application, it has to be appealed to the city commission.
in order to continue on.
Yeah.
Got it.
And that's different than a legislative decision. Legislative decisions are a completely different type of review where we're making policy decisions for big areas, concept plan areas and zone changes and comprehensive plan adoption that affects more than one or two properties. Then it's a legislative decision. The planning commission's decision is a recommendation to the city commission.
Right. And I had some questions about the appeal process, if that's all right, using hypotheticals. So we've got, let's say we have an applicant comes in, they're applying for whatever project. They have 3 things that they want. We give them 2. The third one is, say, a setback reduction. Setback is 20 feet. They want 5. We give them 10. We also have some folks that testify against the application. We approve, A and B, we deny C, give them the 10 feet or whatever. The applicant appeals that to the city commission. The opponent also appeals that to the city commission. Is that one combined hearing?
That often is, yeah.
It is, okay.
So there have been many times where a type 2 decision is appealed on both sides, and we'll bring both up to the city commission, discuss both issues, and the city commission has to make the decision on the original application. Do you, if you have the answer would be the city commission denies the applicant's appeal and approves the neighbor's appeal for this application or vice versa. You're making a decision on approving or denying the appeal, which would that approve or deny the original application.
But it's all one hearing, it's not 2 separate, okay.
Yeah, and that's generally, I'll let Carrie answer, but that's generally for ease of our city commission.
Sure.
Because it's still the basic facts are there, and we're really talking about the original application, and this is what the appellants on both sides are saying.
Right, okay.
I think that the city, I think the city sometimes gives appeals different numbers. Like there'll be AP4, AP5, AP6 to acknowledge that there have been this many appeals, but it is ultimately one application. So we hear it all together and make one decision on all those appeals.
Got it. So, other question I had, type 3, we just flat deny it. Applicant appeals it to the city commission. Does the public, the folks who testified in opposition to it, do they have a role to play? Or is it only the applicant at that point?
No, anybody with standing can participate in any appeal.
They can participate, they can argue against the applicant's appeal in the meeting. Okay,
If you,
So if you participated before the planning commission, you have standing to participate in an appeal. So an applicant wants these things, you come in and argue the applicant shouldn't get those things. But if you don't appeal yourself, you can't argue for the decision was wrong for some other reason. Your position, if you are just a participant, is defense. Does that make sense? You are responding to the issues that the applicant raised on appeal.
gotcha.
yeah, that's a perfect, that happens sometimes where a neighbor doesn't want to appeal themselves, and maybe the neighborhood association or the other neighbor has a grounds for appeal. But I want to add another point, like, I agree with them, and there's this. You can participate, but you're only related to the grounds for appeal that's in front of the city commission.
So does it have to be an issue that I raise? So let's say that Patty and I both testified, and I raised issue A, she raised issue B. I decided to appeal it, and I want to include both of ours. Can I only argue my point, or can I argue any point that was brought up in the meeting, in the
Argue any
hearing?
point that was brought up.
Yeah.
There is no ownership of the issues.
So
Gotcha.
that's in your grounds for appeal. You could have A, B, C, D, E. But the key is if you appeal on A and only A, what Patty can't do is come in and argue B at the appeal hearing, because the city commission is only reviewing appeal argument A.
But I can include argument
If you
A
did.
and argument B in my appeal.
So Patty could participate in the hearing, but maybe she's like, oh, but issue B is my passion, and Greg didn't include it, so I'm gonna talk about issue B. She can't. but she can be your passionate supporter in issue A that you appealed.
Well, what I'm asking is, so Patty doesn't want to appeal. She doesn't want it. She's done with it, whatever.
Yeah.
She's done. And I say, you know what? I think she has a good argument. I'm going to pick that up.
Steal her argument.
You can do that.
Steal
Okay.
it, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Can I just add a quick point? Is it correct to say you can talk about any of the issues and topics brought up in the record?
Correct.
You just can't add new stuff to the record, right?
Correct. And you can't also bring new arguments into the grounds for appeal if they weren't raised in your original grounds for appeal.
So there's an evidentiary limitation, which is what I think Commissioner Staggs is talking about. And then there's a limitation that's imposed by the notice of appeal that you file. You have to raise the grounds for appeal in your notice of appeal, and that is what the city commission is reviewing. A, B, C, D, E can include X, right? Even if there's evidence about X before, if your notice of appeal doesn't raise X, you can't bring up X on appeal. So there's two relevant limitations.
But any person that has standing can speak on any topic in anybody's appeal.
In anybody's appeal.
But they couldn't bring up a new topic that wasn't covered in anybody's appeal.
Correct.
Okay.
Cool, thank you.
Anything else?
I've got a question.
Okay. And then we'll go to Commissioner LaSalle. Commissioner Staggs.
So when you get public comments before it even goes to a hearing, what impact do public comments have in the planning staff's review of the application?
Sure. Well, I'll start with type 2 first, because that's more clear and objective. So for a type 2 process, if I may get a comment that is not relevant at all to the approval criteria. I like purple houses. They need to paint their house purple, this part. Often in the staff report under public comments, you'll see the person's name, what their comment was, and then the staff response. Like, this comment is related to this section of the chapter, this is how it's being implemented, or this comment is not related to any approval criteria, therefore, it can't be implemented. We show where in the staff report we're analyzing that issue and how we're implementing it. Often it's related to this can be seen, the implementation of this criteria can be found in condition number X that requires so on and so forth. So we'll address that. So any type 2 staff report, you'll see all the comments, what it was, how it's related to our criteria, and how staff has addressed it or not addressed it based on its appropriateness. As we get to a hearing, you'll see that in the staff report if we get it ahead of time. And then as they come in the process, we'll gather them up. Some more complicated hearings, you might see a public comment matrix where we identify the comment, what the issues is, and how it's been addressed or not addressed. It really depends on how complicated the issue is. And for a small one, maybe the public comment is added, they come to the evening, Planning Commission addresses it or asks staff to address it, and it's just part of the record. And so doesn't necessarily have to be then put back into a record form if it's not needed for clarity.
Okay, so I just have one follow-up question. So say you have an application and there's a list of public comments, and comments are irrelevant to the application. Like, I think there's too many cars that are going to be in the neighborhood because of blah, blah, blah. But the applicant has done a study that shows that's not the case. So are we still putting those public comments?
Yeah, if you commented, you're in the staff report and you're in
Okay.
an exhibit. Because so our job as staff is to identify the public comment, where its applicable criteria are, and if they're not applicable criteria, to identify that. But our job as staff is not to determine, you still have standing to appeal, even if you
Sure.
say, you know, if your comment's not really relevant, you still have standing in the process.
Right, I get it, okay. Okay, thanks.
Commissioner LaSalle.
Are the types of land use determined by federal or state law?
Oh, the type 1, 2, 3, 4? I'll hand that over to Carrie.
They are largely determined by state law.
Okay. Let's see here. The completeness review refers to up to 30 days. What happens after 30 days and it's not done?
Sure, if the city has 30 days to review a completeness, so we generally send it to the building department, you know, Public Works, Fire, and we get the comments back, and then we send either a completeness letter that starts the 120-day land use clock, or an incompleteness letter that says you are missing the following pieces of information. And in a sense, we're on hold until we get that. Once we get that information, or the applicant says, I don't wish to provide that additional information, please complete me, which is their absolute right to do in the Oregon land use process. When one of those two things happen, the 120-day land use clock starts. Either they've provided that information, or they've requested that we complete the application and start the 120-day land use clock. And the reason that's allowed in state law or required is they don't want cities to use delay or unrealistic requirements of completeness review as a way to hold back an application. The applicant has a right to say, you know, I disagree. I think what I've turned in can meet the requirements. Please move forward and review me.
And my last question, or I guess clarification, would be the type 3, the Planning Commission makes the decision, and the only reason it would go to the City Commission is on appeal. And then type 4, that would go to the Planning Commission and then automatically go to the City Commission.
Correct.
It would be a recommendation and not a decision.
Correct, unless it's a recommendation of denial, and then it stops at the Planning Commission.
And then after a decision goes through the appeal process, what is the next step if either party disagrees with the decision on the appeal?
You mean after the city commission makes a decision?
Yes.
The Land Use Board of Appeals, which is the state court that hears all land use decisions. It's in Salem.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Just to
May
follow
I
up.
just get one clarification? So I'm not sure if Commissioner LaSalle's question about what happens with the 30 days. So if we don't deem it complete or incomplete, I think it's automatically complete.
Oh, yeah. So we work really hard to get either a completeness letter or an incompleteness letter by day 30.
Just make sure I understand this right. On a type 3, if it's not appealed to the City Commission can also call it up, right?
The code does not specify that the city commission can call it up, but because they create the rules, they can call it up.
Okay,
It
think I
hasn't happened very often.
okay.
Is my point. It hasn't happened very often. And oftentimes it's because there's some policy reason for the city commission to call it up. I mean, when I think about the circumstances that I can remember where they've called it up, there have been some significant policy reasons that necessitated them doing that.
And the ones I'm thinking are call-ups of type 2s, actually. It was related to charter park question or the geologic hazards related to a landslide. And so those were two that I'm aware of because they required actually city commission kind of policy comments.
Okay.
What happens
I've
after
got
LUMA?
a couple of concerns on type 2. One is that the public comment period is before the staff report. And then the staff report is issued. There's no way for the public to comment on what's in the staff report. And I just, from personal experience recently, I provided a public comment on the type 2. And fortunately, the decision, thank you, more than covered what my concern was. But if it hadn't, there isn't, other than going to an appeal, which unless you can get the neighborhood association involved and costs a fee, there isn't any way for the public to comment on the staff report. As opposed to a type 3, when we come to the hearing, the public sees the proposed staff report. And I don't know how that works with 120 days, because you're adding now another time period. That's just a concern. The bigger concern that I have is some of the impacts on the neighbors because of the size of some of the projects that can be type 2. And without getting specific, there have been a couple recently that were infill projects, sizable, that generated a great deal of concern. And the type 2 process, there's a big difference to me between providing a written comment and being able to come here and get before the Planning Commission. And I understand the clear and objective standard part of it, but I just wish there was a way that there was some sort of a size limitation where something that might be a type 2, but it goes over, X millions of dollar project or X number of housing units or whatever, becomes a type 3 just because of the impacts on the neighbors. I don't have an answer, but I just have concerns about the way it is now.
Christina, what is the appeal fee for a type 2?
$250.
It's $250 to appeal it to the city commission to get you that hearing. I'm not saying that's, it's not as much as some appeal fees.
Okay.
And you get an appeal, you get a hearing before the city commission where you are free to argue anything that you raised in your comments. Which maybe doesn't get to your point because because as a commenter, you don't know what the decision's going to be.
I think looking at the clear and objective standards and kind of the past LUBA cases, one interesting piece, and I can let Ms. Richter comment on this, but one thing I always worry about in this concept of moving from type 2 to type 3 is creating a hearings process in itself an undue delay that puts us at legal risk for not meeting clear and objective standards. So while clear and objective standards are reviewed at a type 2 level, are we creating an undue delay and clarity of that decision because we've created a hearings process? And I don't know if there's been any kind of review to that.
The problem is that all subdivisions are, by state law, what we call limited land use decisions, which is the term of art to describe what we call type 2s. So you'd have to figure out a way to get some size threshold, improvement cost threshold out of that, carve out of that. And I'm not sure you could do that under the current state law, because the state law says that a subdivision is a limited land use decision, and limited land use decisions are processed through the limited land use procedures, which equates to what we call a type 2. So how are you going to give it a type 3 review when the law says it's a type 2 because it's a limited land use decision? So I'd have to work on that to try to think how we could get it out. If there's any flexibility in the limited land use procedures set forth in ORS 197175 in order to do it. So I get what you're saying, but I'm going to have to think about it.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying. Thank you. And I don't know where I'm going to go from here with that, but any other questions or comments?
Just to follow up, so what comes after LUBA as far as?
Oregon Court of Appeals?
And is that only, is that any issue, or does it only have to be like constitutional issues to go beyond LUBA, or how does that
So
work?
anybody has a right to appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals, and anybody who participates as a party at the Land Use Board of Appeals can appeal to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals will resolve all issues that are raised.
Got it.
And then if you're unhappy with the Court of Appeals decision, you can petition the Oregon Supreme Court for review, and that's where it's permissive. So the Supreme Court can decide not to take your appeal.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Anything else from any of the other commissioners? Okay, thank you both very much, that was helpful. And we'll move on to item number 2, OC 2040 Comprehensive Plan Adoption Process, and that's Ms. Hurd-Ravitch, I believe.
Yes, thank you. So I actually don't really have a presentation. I can pull up the draft document if you want to kind of look through that. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. But really the question that I have for the Planning Commission is if you're ready to move into the adoption process. So I'm looking for a vote on that. I guess it's not a formal vote. And I think maybe there was some more discussion that some of you may have wanted to have, so I can.
The adoption process would be public hearings, right?
Correct, yeah.
One or more public
Yeah.
hearings.
Yeah, so what I envision is that we will have one hearing here at Planning Commission. And this is a legislative topic, so you would make a recommendation to the City Commission to approve or approve with changes or not approve. I'm hoping that you don't make that motion, but, and then it would go to City Commission for 2 readings, first reading of the ordinance, and then another meeting for the second reading of the ordinance. And that first reading is a public hearing as well. But if anybody would like, I can pull up the draft document if you're interested in just kind of scrolling through it.
We might need it, I've got a couple of things. But first, any other commissioners, any comments? Okay, let me bring up a couple of things that I'm concerned about, and then we'll discuss whether we're ready to move into the public hearing process. That makes sense? Okay, first couple of them are pretty minor. So you have the document? Or
Yeah.
do you? Okay.
I will bring that, yeah.
I'm going to work from no, I'm not, I'm in no order, I'm sorry. On page 41, Chapter 2, it's the diverse economy section, Goal 5, Policy 5, Strategy 5C. And I've got it screenshotted here, I'll read it. Coordinate with Clackamas County and Metro to contain city boundaries and for future land uses to areas on relatively level land north of the steep lands of Beaver Creek and its tributaries that border the southern portion of the city, and the steep lands of the tributaries to Abernathy Creek that border the east and southeasterly portions of the city. Does anybody have any idea where that is? So my concern is we need to figure out what is meant by those areas and come up with a different way of explaining it other than that. Because
Well, I think the second one is Newell Creek Canyon. Right? The
Okay.
second, the tributaries to Abernathy Creek that border the east and southeasterly portion.
could be.
I mean, that's east.
I would just like to see some
Yeah.
more research on where those areas are and a different way to spell it out in there.
I think the easiest way would be to refer to a map
Yeah.
and say, see this map.
Great.
An appendix or something like that. And so I did talk with GIS about putting something like that together. We think it's probably follows the lines of like the urban rural reserves. So we can make sure there's a map and then a reference to a map so you can see where that is.
That'd be great. Thank you. Page 36, Chapter 2, Diverse Economy again, and it's Goal 1, Policy 6C. And I don't have it right in front of me, but it's discussing, there we go. 6C, ensure land uses and transportation connections that support tourism as an important aspect of the city's economic development strategy. This could include connections to the end of the Oregon Trail, Interpretive Center, and the train depot. And I think that should also mention historic downtown and what's now known as Tumwata Village, And also, and I don't know how to describe it other than Midtown, but the area of the McLaughlin House and the Ermitinger House in Midtown. So that we're talking about transportation connections between all of those tourism aspects and not just the end of the Oregon Trail Center and the train depot, which is across the street. So not much of a transportation connection. So that's the only thing I have there. And the third one gets into a little more of a policy discussion. And I don't know whether we should have that tonight or whether it would be something to do in a public hearing. And it actually is mentioned a couple of times, but if you could go to page 39, Chapter 2, Diverse Economy again. Goal 5, Policy 3, Strategy 3A.
Okay, goal 5,
Goal 5, Policy 3, Strategy 3A.
right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maximize new public facilities and services by encouraging, that's a key word, new development within the urban growth boundary at maximum densities allowed by the comprehensive plan. That is troubling to me, to say that we're encouraging maximum densities. I understand we're trying to leverage our dollars on public facilities, and we probably should consider maximum densities, but I really am troubled by our comprehensive plan say that we're going to encourage maximum density allowed by the comprehensive plan. I'd love to know what my fellow commissioners think about that.
I agree.
Would it suffice to just eliminate the word maximum?
What kind of developments are we talking about?
Well, my first thought was if we're talking about a subdivision, let's say, and every one of our designations, R6, R3.5, whatever, have a maximum and minimum number of units per acre.
Right.
And the way I read this is saying that we're going to encourage going to the maximum unit per acre.
Well, anybody who's going to develop that property is going to be developing most likely to the maximum density.
But that may not be what is in the best interest of the city. That's the point that I'm making.
But isn't the zoning already established?
Within, it is, within.
And that policy will not apply to a subdivision that's already got zoning, right? That policy is not going to apply to a subdivision that already has zoning. This policy is only going to apply when you have a zone change or a comprehensive plan change or a conditional use permit that where a criterion says the comprehensive plan applies. So straight subdivision is not going to have the comprehensive plan apply. I mean, I'm not disputing the merits of your point. I'm just saying a subdivision is not a good example because the comprehensive plan is not going to apply to a subdivision.
Yeah, so because of that, I think maybe your concern should not be a concern because of what she just said. Because we're not encouraging maximum density for something that's already been zoned for a certain density. You can't change the density.
But isn't there a range of densities in each of the zoning designations?
So if it's zoned R10, there is a range.
Well, because if it's comprehensive plan, low density residential, you have R6, R8, and R10.
Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. If you have a comprehensive plan designation of low density residential, you have options for R6, R8, and R10.
So you're going to have, so you've got an annexation, say. You have a low density residential comprehensive plan designation on an annexation proposal. You're going to make a decision whether to zone it R6, R8, and R10. Under this plan policy, you would zone it R10 or R6 because you want to maximize the density in order to maximize the dollar you're getting for your public improvement. Right? that's where that choice comes in. But once it's R6, once that R6 has been decided, assigned zoning of R6, then the plan policy isn't going to apply. Right? Do you see the distinction?
So then, if this is included in the comp plan, then the city is essentially compelled to make it R6, and nothing will, in the urban growth boundary that's brought into the city, will ever be at the lowest density level.
I don't think so, because I think that there would be other plan policies that might dictate doing something different. I mean, that's the whole plan, comprehensive plan has different policies, and steep slopes, natural resources might dictate evaluating the policies differently. But as a general proposition, this policy would say, we're going to try to go with the highest density in places where we're going to get the biggest bang for our infrastructure dollar, unless other plan policies dictate doing something differently.
Right.
But, okay, so every time we get a proposal for a subdivision, let's say it's 100 lots, whatever, there's always an item in the staff report that says, based on this zoning, the minimum number of units in this area must be X, and the maximum must be Y. And it lands somewhere in the middle. And that's what I'm saying. I'm reading this to say that we're always, that we're going to encourage Y every time, regardless of what the geographic conditions on the site may be, or, so it reads to me like we're going to shoehorn in the maximum number of units within that range. We're encouraging that.
But what I'm saying is, in that hypothetical you just gave, where it's zoned R6, and you could have 6,000 square foot lots or down to 4,000 with lot averaging, or whatever it is, this plan policy will not apply to that lot size determination, because comprehensive plan policies don't apply to subdivisions when you're not changing the zone. So this plan policy will not apply.
Okay.
Can you give us an example of when it would apply?
I think the light bulb just went on. I think I got what you just said.
It will apply in the annexation context where you have a low-density residential comprehensive plan designation, and somebody wants to annex, and they want to change the zone, and you have to decide whether you're going to go with an R6, R8, or R10.
Right.
That comprehensive plan policy would suggest you go with R6, unless there would be some other comprehensive plan policy that would dictate doing something else. And that's the whole idea with comprehensive plan policies, is you're balancing different objectives to decide what makes sense. And this is a principle for infrastructure financing. And I mean, I'm not saying don't change it. I'm just saying that's how it's a balancing effort, and it's not a clear and objective every time it's going to be R6 because of this plan policy.
Thank you for that explanation.
So if I own property that's in the UGB, I apply for annexation. During that process, I would point to strategy 3A and say, hey, this is zoned low density. Because of strategy 3A, you guys should zone it R6. Is that how an applicant would use this?
Well, and I think it would be that in order to develop this property, I got to a big sewer line down this road, or I got to build a big road, and it's going to be expensive. So I need R6 in order to justify the big expensive water pump or whatever it is that I need to serve this development. And so that would be a reason why the city might go with R6. But then there might be steep slopes, so it may not make sense to be R6.
Gotcha, okay.
But essentially, Commissioner Stoll, I think that's the level of review at which this policy gets applied.
Okay.
It's at that annexation, at time of annexation, when you're applying zoning.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? Do you want a motion to move forward, or do you just need a consensus? What would you like?
First, I want to understand what revisions we may or may not be making. So I am going to include a map to go along with 5C on page 41. And let me just make sure I've got the right, where did I go past it? Okay. All right, so I will do that. And I think I've got consensus on that. There's a suggestion to change the wording. Let me get to it here. On 6C. To update that wording to basically, I think, to make it a little more, I'm going to say modern, like to kind of fit what we have in, okay. And so do I have consensus on that change?
Well, I don't want to argue for argument's sake, but there's other historical sites in Oregon City that aren't there. So, I mean, are we trying to list every single historic site? Is that what we're trying to do here? Because they're not, the Rose Farm is a very important thing, and it's on Holmes Lane, it's not anywhere near. So do we want to leave the language broader, or do we want to be specific?
I would say leave it broader.
Broader and use historic attractions.
I'm good with that. I just didn't like that it only pointed out those.
Yeah, let's not be specific. Let's just leave the first sentence, maybe just take out the second sentence.
Yeah, I like the word historic attractions, that works.
Yeah, this could include connections to various historic attractions.
Well, it already says historic and cultural amenities to grow the tourism industry up in the policy. So we want to connect
Yeah,
people to not only the historic stuff, but also other cultural amenities of the city.
Right. Okay. Historic and cultural amenities? That good?
Yes.
Okay. So it's something along the lines of ensure land uses and transportation connections that support tourism as an important aspect of the city's economic development strategy. I am on the right one, right? Okay. This will include important historical and cultural resources. Did I get that right?
Connections to.
Connections, okay. Okay. Let me make sure I got that.
What or what?
Includes, this includes?
Yeah.
Without?
Includes.
Okay,
Includes.
this includes important cultural, historical, I'm sorry, I missed the last word. This includes important historical, cultural and historical, was it resources? Places?
What's the word? Was it resources?
Amenities?
Amenities? Facility, no, amenities?
Okay,
That works.
okay. Perfect, great, okay. All right, and then the last one that we that we were just discussing, is that one changing? Are we changing, encouraging to consider?
I'd like to remove maximum.
You'd like to what?
I'd like to remove maximum. I don't know what to put in its place, but skewing it to one end or the other. I mean, at minimum is inappropriate as well. I think,
Okay.
I think it needs to be
I go for that.
whatever.
Can we go back to that?
Oh, yeah,
Could
sorry.
you?
Actually, maybe not. Where are we
I
at
think
now?
if it doesn't say minimum or maximum, it really doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
Oh, if you're annexing to the city from a rural designation, and she was saying, you've got to rationalize, the city has to rationalize the investment and all the infrastructure as well.
But I'd like that argument to be made by the people making the application and having that discussion at the time without being guided by this sentence.
Well, it says encouraging, it doesn't say required.
Very good.
So because it's just encouraging, it's saying we'd like you to do this, but it doesn't say you have to.
I could
How
agree with
about-
that.
What about if instead of encouraging, it said considering new development within at maximum densities?
Would it make
We're not
any
pushing the
difference?
minimum or maximum. but we'll consider maximum if it meets the other criteria. And maybe I'm just grasping at straws.
I still think the word maximum should be deleted.
Well, this is about new public facilities, right?
Right. And services.
Well, public facilities in this case, I think, means utilities for the most part, not, pools and parks.
I guess the other question is, well, this policy was developed through the OC 2040 public process.
This specific one is wording directly from the 2004 comp plan,
Okay.
having to do with, this whole goal 5 was added to make sure we had a way to review urbanization, which is another way of saying land applying for annexation.
Can you go up to where it describes goal 5?
Yeah. So this is kind of maybe a compromise, maybe too wishy-washy, but we could say something along the lines of maximize new public facilities and services by, we'll say, considering new development within the urban growth boundary at reasonable densities. Reasonable is quite subjective.
Yeah, reasonable or adequate, either one.
Yeah, I like that. I like reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go just about anywhere with that.
It's true.
Well, and I think that's the issue, because let's face it, there's no easy dirt left in Oregon City. There's always going to be weird things that we have to try to fit and work around, and to try to go to maximum density with some of the land we're going to be dealing with is going to be tough, so. You got it?
Okay.
Okay, so do you want a motion then to move forward with the public process?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to proceed with the adoption process of OC 2040 with revisions.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, call the question, please.
Okay, Commissioner Bob LaSalle,
Yes.
Commissioner Chris Staggs,
Yes?
Commissioner Daphne West,
Aye.
Commissioner Patty Gage,
Aye.
Commissioner Greg Stoll,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Mike Mitchell.
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we have a break before our
Okay,
next
that
meeting.
is our agenda. I apologize to those of you in the audience, but we're a little late. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll start at 7:10. The work session is adjourned.